Hello and welcome to another episode of the CHGO Fire Podcast, presented by Coors Light, the official domestic beer partner of Chicago Fire FC. Chicago, choose chill. Go to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer to get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I'm Alex Campbell. Thanks again for joining me here live on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Later on in the show, I'm going to be joined by Joe Lowery of Backheeled and the Total Soccer Show to talk about the season in MLS and some notable storylines from around the league. But of course, this being a Fire podcast, we do have to start with the Chicago Fire, and they still stink. They have played 3 games since we last had a show. They won the first one, 2-1 at home, over the New York Red Bulls on a winning goal from Yorios Koutsias. The Fire getting a goal as well from Tom Barlow, his first for the team since signing in the offseason. And of course, he scored it against his former club. So this briefly restored some hope. The MLS Eastern Conference is a total and utter disaster. There's going to be 2 or 3 flat-out bad soccer teams that make the playoffs in the East this year. So getting that win kept the Fire very much alive. And then they lost the next 2 games, which were also coincided by not having Ugo Kuipers in the team for either of them. Congratulations are, of course, in order to Ugo, his wife, and their family for the birth of their first child. So he has been on paternity leave. We're likely to hear from Frank Klopas tomorrow in his weekly press availability if Kuipers is expected back this weekend. It was a 1-0 loss in Nashville, which came on a very weird goal. It was a looping header from former Nottingham Forest striker Sam Surridge. Those teams both stink. The Fire stink, Nashville stink. That was not a good game of soccer. It was a weird goal. Would have absolutely been 0-0 otherwise, because even though they've got Ani Mukhtar, Nashville can't create anything, and the Fire could not capitalize on Nashville not being particularly strong outside of Mukhtar. And then the Fire went up to Montreal at Stade Saputo and lost 2-0. No Alan Aragoni, Cal Acosta in that starting lineup. I don't know what's going on there. Aragoni in particular, it's weird that he isn't playing literally every minute, especially he, like Kuipers, got a short break in the summer due to having been playing so much soccer since last season in Europe and not really getting a break. The fact that Arnaud Souquet is playing almost every minute and Aragoni is being restricted to reserve duty, there's a non-soccer explanation there somewhere. I don't know what it is. This feels like the sort of thing that we might just gonna have to fast forward to the off-season. Aragoni's contract is one where he is technically on loan, and so the Fire have to decide what are they going to do with him in the off-season. They've got options there about how to extend that or to sign him permanently. I think I speak for a lot of fans when I hope he stays. He's been pretty good this season. I think he's been a good signing. Cal Acosta, same thing. Don't really understand why he's not playing every available minute and why Fede Navarro is starting in this game instead. It doesn't make absolutely any sense to me. Joseph Martinez scores the opening goal in that game. Of course, he burns Arnaud Souquet in the process. Arnaud seems like a nice guy, but I've had enough of watching him play soccer for the Fire. It has been a thoroughly frustrating experience, but hey, there's only a few games remaining. And then Caden Clark scores with a ridiculous chip finish over Chris Brady. Yes, that is where Caden Clark is playing soccer now. You may remember him from being a breakout star several years ago now as a teenager with the New York Red Bulls. He then had that pre-contract agreement to go to RB Leipzig and move up the Red Bull food chain after that really strong debut campaign. And then he was loaned back to Red Bull in New York. Was not very good. Kind of fizzled out there, ended up even playing some games for Red Bull 2 in that time. Ended up back home in his birthplace in Minnesota on loan, played for Minnesota United. Even ended up in the 2nd division in Denmark briefly while he was still contracted on a loan from RB Leipzig, but has seemed to refine himself. Montreal's been a very weird team. Halfway through the year, it certainly looked like they were kind of trying to tank, and now they might sneak into the playoffs because MLS playoff structure bad. So the upshot of all of this, with looking at the standings, is that the Philadelphia Union occupy the final MLS Eastern Conference playoff spot on 36 points. Montreal 34, Atlanta 33, Nashville 33, DC 33, Fire 29, New England 28 rounds out the bottom of the Eastern Conference. The big problem there is not just that the Fire are currently 7 points out of a playoff spot. It's that they've played one more game than everybody else and 2 more than the New England Revolution. So as of right now, I would say it is likely that the Chicago Fire are going to finish dead last in the Eastern Conference. They will not win the Wooden Spoon, though. That was wrapped up this weekend because, my God, the San Jose Earthquakes are maybe the biggest train wreck we've ever seen in this league. Left for the Fire, they have home games against Toronto, then they are at Charlotte, then they are home against Nashville. 3 games left. Toronto is currently just above Philly inside the playoff places. Charlotte as well looks like they're safe for a playoff spot, kind of middle of that 9-team pack. They're floating 5th or 6th right now. And then home against Nashville, who we've established are already bad. That game is probably not going to be a damn thing for either team on the last day of the season. So yeah, the Fire's maximum amount of points is 38, which would mean they need to win out, and they need so much help, and that help would include the Philadelphia Union only getting a single point out of their final 4 games. That just isn't going to happen. So while it's not going to be confirmed until this weekend after the games finish and after the Fire play against Toronto this weekend, this season is once again, it is over for the Chicago Fire. We have a 7th straight year of the Fire not making the playoffs. I've said a lot about this, a lot of people have. There's absolutely no way to sugarcoat the fact that that shouldn't be possible. In a league where more than half the teams are making the playoffs, you should be able to stumble into making the playoffs on a frequent basis, and the Flyers haven't been able to do it. Ownership change hasn't done it. General manager change hasn't done it. Coaching changes haven't done it. Players haven't seen it matter. The Fire ostensibly this offseason had a good offseason. I mean, Hugo Kuipers, Alan Aragoni, Cal Acosta, etc. Those are all good additions. Those are all additions that made the team better, and I, for the life of me, cannot understand how it's possible. I don't think anybody can at this point. The Fire will hope that more massive changes in the offseason are going to allow something to change, to get better, because this team's going to be worse than the team was last year. It's going to be worse than the team was the year before that. It doesn't make sense how that's even remotely possible. But here we are. We're at the end of another season that doesn't seem to have mattered. The Fire we've got a lot of guys on a contract. It's there's a lot of opportunity for change. Sorry, we've got a few technical difficulties for those of us watching live, so we apologize for that. We are working on the audio, but that just kind of remains the case, is that there's a lot of room for change in the Fire this offseason. Lots of free agents, lots of new players likely to come in, designated player spots open, as we have covered absolutely ad nauseum. But I think the most frustrating thing out of all of this has been that, man, there's just very little to no fight at all in what we've seen from this team this year. There's some energy shown on occasion. There's some fight shown on occasion by individual players, maybe on a limited basis. But man, by and large, this season doesn't really look like anyone gives a damn. And I'm sure players would take offense to that and umbrage with that, and I wouldn't blame them for doing so. But just some of the lack of effort we've seen at times, these kind of, I think it's the way fans feel. Everybody, I think, about halfway through this season knew this is where we were headed, and it feels like coaches, players, the team accepted that same fate, despite the fact that it was changeable, and that in MLS you're never out of a playoff race. I mean, Nashville, New England, those are teams that have spent the majority of the season in absolute dead last place, and they still have a chance to make the playoffs in MLS. And for the fact to see the Fire, as much as any team, basically just kind of mail it in down the stretch. I mean, there's certainly people I'd be unfortunate to see go this offseason. Fabian Herbert is chief among them. He's the longest-serving current player on the roster. And yeah, and he's a guy who maybe he's going to seek greener pastures elsewhere, I'd assume. He's somebody who's very, very high on the list for a team like San Diego in their expansion season, and them, looking to add veteran guys who aren't super expensive. We've got word from in the chat that the audio is better, that we're moving in the right direction, so that's good to hear. Awesome. Thank you to...
No, that's my bad, fellas. Everybody in the chat, that's on me. We had a small roadcaster error from the Bears remote. We were not fully set up in here, but we can get into the nitty-gritty later.
Yeah,
all good now.
Hey, let's be honest. If there was a time in this show to have audio issues, it's me talking about one of the most just kind of consistently pathetic franchises in Major League Soccer, and even by Chicago sports standards, a real failure. I mean, I say that as, although it's probably going to get rained out today, the White Sox are a game away from being officially the worst team in baseball history. Personally, if that game gets rained out and is made up like tomorrow at 1 with absolutely nobody there, I think that would be the perfect way for them to have that final loss. Relatedly, I'm not saying to not go to these last couple of games. There's 2 home games left in the season. There's still that community around the team, that of the fans, and enjoy these last couple of games for all you can, especially enjoy seeing and watching guys who might not be here next season. I mean, you really have no idea when a team is in this state and we are expecting just really significant wholesale leadership change in terms of the soccer ops. Whether it's Gregg Berhalter or anybody else, somebody new could come into this team and they could want to keep almost none of it. I mean, you could easily take an outsider view and say, this isn't working. Can we change all of it? No, you can't change all of it. Like, for example, Ugo Kuiper's still going to be on this team next year. Brian Gutierrez and Chris Brady, if they don't get, Godfather offers from Europe, are going to be here next year. There's a long list of guys who you can feel confident will be on this team. Maybe not that long, actually, now that I think about it. I would say maybe about half the roster feels secure, but the other half doesn't. And it's really hard to say where it's going at this point. It's, from my perspective, I'm trying to take the long view. I first started really covering the team in 2019. It's really the only season I ended up spending as a beat reporter on the beat of the Fire, due to the fact that COVID happened, things changed a lot there, and I remember that season. That was the last Veljko Paunovic year, and that team was not very good either, but it felt like even though that team had obvious flaws, there were characters in that locker room like Dax McCarty, like Bastian Schweinsteiger, who came into that team. Just a lot of veteran guys. David Akam was still around. CJ Sapong was a figure in that locker room. Johan Kappelhoff. There were guys who, even though the team was struggling, there were guys who clearly, whether it was just personal because they wanted the team to play better or they wanted to play better, or it was bigger because they felt a really deep connection to the fans or to the team or whatever it was. There was a lot of guys in that locker room who took ownership for the state of things. Paunovic was the same way. He did not mince words. He was, if things were bad, he would say so, and he would be pretty upfront about it and open to talking about it, and seemed very, empathetic to the way that fans were feeling about it. And I certainly think Frank Klopas feels empathetic as somebody who cares about the Fire as much as anybody does, but it has just felt like down the stretch there hasn't been a whole lot of that, and I think it would have been good to see a little bit more bites, a little bit more something, rather than just acceptance of what feels like another inevitable waste of a soccer season for the Chicago Fire. And once again, we are headed to a place where the offseason is going to be of much more interest. But that is enough about this current sad soccer team. We're going to take a quick break, and after that, I'll be joined by Joe Lowery of Backheeled and the Total Soccer Show to talk about all things around MLS. But first, a quick word from a few sponsors. CHGO Fire is, of course, presented by Coors Light. Going to do my best on the live reads today, coming off a wedding this weekend. I still think it should be a stronger performance than the Fire had.
Between work, social media, your absolutely lousy Chicago sports team, and all the choices life throws our way, really awful rainy days like this one, there are so many opportunities to just take a step back and choose to chill. Coors Light celebrates rising above and choosing that chill mindset. When you need to choose to chill, that is the perfect time to reach for an ice-cold Coors Light. It is mountain cold refreshment. We had some good vibes a few weeks ago at our CHGO takeover event that Coors Light helped us with before the Fire game against Inter Miami. That was a nice time to choose to chill despite, the Fire's form and, Inter Miami and no Messi and all of those things. And we're coming up in the fall. We're coming up on kind of what I think is not even the summer. I think the fall is really that peak outdoor barbecue around a fire season. It's going to be a lot of chill opportunities here in Chicago and wherever you're listening from as the year goes on. And when you choose to chill, that is the time to crack open a Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. It is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment, crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill and choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. CHGO Fire is also brought to you by our friends at Shady Rays. And as summer turns to fall, get ready for all your fall activities, the remaining outdoor adventures ahead in 2024 with quality shades that are built to last. Shady Rays has you covered with their premium polarized shades that do not break the bank, a fraction of some of those other brands when it comes to that sticker price. Shady Rays is an independent sunglass company. They offer a world-class product that over 300,000 people have rated 5 stars. With their durable frames and crystal clear optics, they are perfect for all your outdoor adventures. Hundreds of options, styles, colors to choose from. I've had a great experience as a Shady Rays customer, not just, somebody who says nice things about them on a podcast, particularly with my experience with their lost or broken guarantee after a pair of my shades that I'd had for a couple of years broke, and I was able to get an enormous discount off not only a brand new pair, but an additional pair as well that they were offering for their 11th birthday earlier this summer. So shout out to the customer service team online at Shady Rays. If your shades ever go missing, they take an unexpected hit. It doesn't matter. They have that most insane protection in all of eyewear. Or if you don't love your shades, you can exchange them for a new pair, return them worry-free within 30 days. There is no risk when you shop. Their team always has your back with personal and fast support. Exclusively for CHGO listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to ShadyRays.com and use code CHGO for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. We are now joined here on CHGO Fire by a very special guest all the way from out in Arizona, where I assume it is not pouring rain outside. Joe Lowery, the founder of Backheeled, where they do great MLS coverage as well as NWSL and U.S. national team stuff. And you can hear most days of the week on the Total Soccer Show. And if you're listening in with our friends in the PHNX region, you can hear him as the color commentator on the home games for Phoenix Rising. Joe, thanks so much for taking the time out of that insanely busy schedule to come on the show.
Of course, it's great to be here. No rain at the moment, although Arizona's monsoon seasons are criminally underrated and under-discussed. So, it's not just like we never have rain, but you're correct. We don't have rain like right now.
Yeah, I take advantage of the fact that the only time I ever go to Arizona like a stereotypical Chicagoan is sometime between January and March when it's neither raining nor an oven outside, at least most of the time. So I would say that is probably under-discussed and not well known about. Joe, we will get to MLS stuff, but I have you on a Chicago Fire show, so I do want to briefly discuss the local team here. In the opening segment, I called it a waste of a season. Shaqiri's gone, Heights is leaving, Brian Gutierrez hasn't really taken that next step. They spent $15 million on a striker who has scored 10 goals, so that's okay. But as an outsider, what do you make of a Fire team that ostensibly got better on paper ahead of this season, getting even worse on the field somehow?
Yeah, waste of a season is, I think, an excellent way to sum it all up. I think Kuipers was a great addition, and Joe Mansueto's continued willingness to spend on the first team roster is maybe the only real silver lining. And it is a big silver lining, right? That means that Chicago's ceiling is higher than the vast majority of teams in Major League Soccer. And that is something. It's just not a lot when your team is not winning games and has been poorly constructed and there's a lack of clarity around everything involved with the club. I think realistically, the fact that Georg Heitz and Sebastian Pelter were renewed, like that they were given contract extensions before the season, was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in Major League Soccer. And there's a long list of crazy things that happen in this crazy league. So, I mean, realistically, that should never have happened. And that is a huge black mark against Joe Mansueto's decision-making. Heights should not have been brought back. The team has been a dumpster fire, pun sort of intended, hate myself. Like really since he took charge of the front office, there are lots and lots and lots of problems in Chicago. And I don't need to echo all those things. Like, we didn't really learn anything about the fire. Hugo Kuipers looked like he was going to be a great addition to Major League Soccer. And if he had anybody to pass him the ball besides Brian Gutierrez, he probably would have far more than 10 goals in the regular season. Right. So I think he's worth building around. There are some good pieces in this team, but man, I can understand. And I heard you lead into the break there with like an offseason that's going to be more interesting, right? And this is going to be a hugely consequential offseason. It's just frustrating that there was this whole year's worth of bad soccer in between off seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. We do also have to acknowledge a thing that I think a lot of people just said, oh, this makes sense, and now we're starting to see a little smoke around it, is this idea of Gregg Berhalter coming in, but it's not clear whether he'd be just a coach and a chief soccer officer, a la Peter Vermes in Kansas City. What do you make of this idea, the idea that Berhalter is just the guy who lives locally but is also the former national team coach, and the idea of him wielding quite a bit of power if he was brought in?
Yeah, so I'll split this into two paths. So I really like this move if it means that Gregg Berhalter is coaching and his job is to coach the team. I think that Berhalter is very qualified for the Chicago Fire, I guess is the polite way to put it. I think he would be a good hire by most MLS teams, and I think he generally did a good job with the U.S. men's national team. I think he was slow at times to make personnel adjustments. I think he was a little slow to adjust in general. But really the culture that he helped build, and let's think about the culture that the Fire need to rebuild with the national team, was impressive, even if it did sour after you lose games at the Copa America. That happens, right? I think Berhalter, the coach, is sharp, has a way that he wants to play, is not as dogmatic with his possession principles as folks think he is, and we saw clearly a stylistic shift for him with the men's national team from when he took over in 2019 to when he was let go in 2024. So I think he would do a good job as manager of this team. I just don't like the idea of giving somebody in MLS in 2024 control over the entire sporting side and also making them coach games. I think MLS is too complicated now, frankly, for that to be a super successful model. There's a caveat here that I'll come back to, but the reason why I don't like it is, well, first of all, we have good evidence that teams don't like it. People that are a lot smarter about soccer than I am. SKC and Peter Vermes, you mentioned, are the only team still running with this model. And they're horrible. Like they're not a good soccer team, and they've been bad for years now. So that's a concern. But I think MLS has reached the point where, maybe a decade ago or 2 decades ago, in earlier editions of MLS, whatever, something 0.0, whatever versions those were, like MLS wasn't all that intricate in terms of, you don't need maybe a full scouting network because you don't realistically have players you're going to go sign from the top tier in Belgium like Hugo Kuipers. You don't have a data and analytics staff. You don't have XYZ. Things were simpler then. Now there are more teams. There's more tape for coaches to study. There are often more players and higher level ones in these rosters that you have to manage as a manager. And then there are so many more conversations that you're involved in now as a sporting director. It is just a different context to do both of those jobs in 2024. And so I don't love that concept whatsoever. Like you said, it's unclear what's going to happen here. But I will say the caveat is that this isn't going to make anybody all that happy. The bar is so low, right? I think if you hope that Gregg Berhalter is going to set up some good processes to help move you forward, and I think he can, then yeah, this is probably not the worst thing to have him do both jobs. But is it the best thing? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, that is the thing. Like if say whoever comes in, if the Fire finish 7th next year and make the playoffs, they're going to be heralded as a huge success because it's we're approaching a decade since this team cleared the incredibly low bar of simply making the playoffs. Let's talk a little other Eastern Conference stuff in this segment. I know you have a lot of love for Wilfried Nancy and the Columbus Crew, who, along with FC Cincinnati, are chasing Miami and Messi and friends. to set that new points record that Miami are on course for, with the Ohio teams trailing behind in the East. I want to believe in Columbus as just a fan of the sport because, like you, I like watching them play. But at the same time, I just don't know if you can bet against Messi and Miami at this point. It feels like they are team of destiny. I mean, do you think there's a lot splitting them, or do you think the Ohio teams have a shot?
I think the Ohio teams have a shot, not for the Supporter Shield, which is clearly going to be Miami's, but when it comes to MLS Cup and the road to the playoffs, yeah, I think both of those teams have a real shot. Columbus, I do view as a not significantly, but maybe slightly better team right now than FC Cincinnati. I think Miami are at a point where their ceiling is so far above anybody else's. When Messi shows up, it's done. Luis Suarez, people were writing him off after preseason, which was insane to me. But like he's incredible, and those two players can do things that no Columbus players, and I know Cucho Hernandez exists, can do. At the same time, their floor is also lower, I think, than the Crew's floor. And we've seen Miami drop a bunch of points, really, since the Leagues Cup break was over, and over the last few weeks, Miami have struggled to actually go out there and get results. They played poorly against the Union and did pick up points in that game, but have stumbled. Columbus, I think, are a more consistent team. When they have their full squad together, they'll get through this super heavy fixture congestion. They've got a game on Wednesday in the Campeones Cup. They've been playing. It's the Crew and LAFC who have played more games than anybody else since August 1st in Major League Soccer. By the time they both played their Cup finals on Wednesday, they'll both play 12 games. Miami haven't had to deal with that. And so when Columbus are finally back and steady and have their first choice lineup out on the field, yeah, I think they've got a real shot. And Cincinnati too, right? Lucho Acosta's a game changer. There's enough quality in that team. They have a chance. I still think Miami are my personal pick to make the run all the way through just because of that ceiling. But if you ask me if it would surprise me at all if Columbus get the job done, no, not in the slightest.
No, especially not in a one-off game like what that theoretical Eastern Conference final would look like. Last thing before we take a break and switch to the Western Conference, the Fire are arguably not the biggest underachievers in the Eastern Conference this year, I guess, relative to expectations. The Philadelphia Union, you mentioned, they haven't been very good. Looks like they're maybe going to sneak in. Atlanta United have been an absolute total mess. Looking at those teams, which one of them do you think is going to have the tougher job bouncing back? Because I feel like on the one hand, Philly feel like they've reached the end of this cycle with all these kids that kept hitting and these young players versus an Atlanta team that, Arthur Blank, like Joe Mansueto, willing to spend money, but that roster right now is just in horrific shape.
I actually think we'll see both of these teams bounce back up the standings next season. Philly quietly have some of the best underlying numbers in the league. They've had a brutal injury record this year. They struggled, no doubt about it. But you mentioned the end of this era. I actually think they've already begun transitioning into the next one, with Quinn Sullivan being a really useful Ali Bedoya replacement. He's an academy graduate. I think they are progressing into the next stage. They lose Julian Carranza to Feyenoord over in the Eredivisie, and Ty Baribo has had it such that they're not missing a beat. Like, he's been incredible, scoring goal after goal since Leagues Cup. I do think Philly are going to sink into the playoffs and stick above the line. And I could see of all the teams that are sort of lower seeded, I could see them winning a game in the first round, maybe more so than any of these others. So I do think Philly will climb up. Atlanta, of those two, certainly have more to do, right? So they have a coach to hire. They have a general manager to hire underneath Garth Lagerwey in that front office. And they have 2 DP spots to fill. And they probably also have 2 U22 initiative spots to fill. I don't know if they're going to get to all of that in the winter. Maybe you go out and snag 1 DP in the winter and you add 1 more in the summer. I don't know what that's going to look like. They have a lot more to do, which means they also have a lot more they could get wrong. But with the amount of money that Blank is willing to spend and with some of the figures they have inside the club already and some of the talent that's in this roster, maybe I'm foolish for drinking the Kool-Aid and I feel like I keep coming back to the Atlanta United well. I just have a hard time thinking they're not going to be noticeably better in 2025 than they've been this year.
Yeah, and they have a bit of a Fire situation where, they do have Lagerwey in place there, but they let go of Carlos Bocanegra after a long time there. When you think about, again, the amount of money they're willing to spend, and they have the track record that the Fire don't in terms of bringing those people in. Arthur Blank is really going all in on soccer these days, given the U.S. soccer involvement he has in helping construct that training center there. It's then, of course, very funny that a non-Joe Mansueto Chicago billionaire is now paying Mauricio Pochettino's salary. But we'll get to that more later. We've got to take one more break. We'll have some Western Conference and U.S. men's national team's thoughts right after this. CHGO Fire is brought to you by Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, your home for judgment-free cannabis shopping, a place where all kinds of visitors are welcome to explore, discover, and purchase from their wide array of high-quality products. They have everything you need to elevate your summer, your fall, whatever season we are now technically in. I think September 22nd is technically the cutoff, but hey, that's made up anyway. There are so many amazing things about the experience with Sunnyside. They are a one-stop shop with their expertly curated menu, over 100 strains to choose from, and easy online ordering and in-store pickup. Their team are so helpful and welcoming at their locations, both across Chicagoland and the state of Illinois, including here in the city in Wrigleyville and River North. If you're just starting out, their expert guidance will really help direct you to brands they know you'll love, just getting used to the experience of shopping and using their products like Good News and Mindy's. Or if they're a pro, they've got you covered with over 100 strains on the menu. New items added weekly. They know you'll love Cresco and Florical's incredible quality and consistent products. It's easy to order online. They're there to help in store, whatever your experience or needs. Visit Sunnyside.shop, that is sunnyside.shop, for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases. Not just a one-time code, 3 purchases at 50% off when you enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, bright buys every day, only for 21 and over or Illinois medical card holders. Also, lots of cool stuff going around here at CHGO. Shout out to everybody who came out to the Bears watch party against the Colts at Joe's on Weed over the weekend, despite the results and experience of watching that game, and probably everybody there feeling like they would be better at fourth down play calls. Lots of cool stuff going on with the Bears podcast, though. Walked in today, and Adam Hogue was recording another episode of the 85 with Cole Kmet. There's a special merch collection online now for that show, and there's still spots available for the CHGO Bears crew going to London in October. Those tickets are extremely limited, remaining. So much cool stuff. You can go to the event page at allchgo.com for all the details. They're also taking a trip out Joe's way to Phoenix, Arizona, and they'll see the Bears take on the Arizona Cardinals. That is on November 3rd. And of course, every day here at CHGO, there's always new content, podcasts, live shows, every team, every day, post-game shows on some teams. Be sure to show some love to our White Sox guys over the coming days with that season and complete dumpster fire wrapping up. And if you're a member, if you're a diehard, you get premium merch content, 20% off all events. There's dope merch for all the teams, and you get a free shirt when you become a member, as well as access to the CHGO Lounge on Discord. All that and more at allchgo.com. All right, Joe, got a few Western Conference things I want to touch on. And, people have talked about the Chicago Fire as a sleeping giant in MLS for a very long time and not living up to their potential. It's only a few years ago the LA Galaxy were hiding around wooden spoon territory, and they are fully back. Looks like they're going to finish top of the West. Is it just as simple that that front four of Joveljic, Peck, Paintsel, and Puig are that good? Also, Marco Royce is on this team, or is there more to them, do you think, than just ridiculous high-end talent?
I think that's a ton of it, to be honest. When you look at this team, they're still not very good defensively. And so there's not a ton of other places to look besides the fact that, yeah, their attack has been absolutely unbelievable this year. They set a record earlier this past weekend for having 4 attackers with 10-plus goals on the season. They're the first team in MLS history to do that. The West has been so much better than I thought it was going to be this year. But the Galaxy's success has been somewhat predictable in that Will Kuntz has come in and given their front office like a legitimate purpose and has built out this really strong squad and identified tons of top-end talent. Marco Royce doesn't get any credit for that because it doesn't take a genius to identify Marco Royce, but gone out and added a couple of fantastic wingers in Gabriel Peck and Joseph Paintsel, both at that 10-plus goal mark at this point in the season. Peck has been one of the best wingers in all of Major League Soccer. Those guys are incredible. And you toss that to Ricky Puig, who was there before Kuntz got there. But then you add in a couple of the free agent additions that they've made and a couple of the intra-league deals, thinking about Edwin Cerrillo and Diego Fagundes coming in, John McCarthy as well being their starting goalkeeper. He's been a big upgrade for them in that part of the field. They seem to me, from an outsider's perspective, to be a legitimately well-run club at this point in the year 2024. And that has not been the case for the Galaxy in a long, long time.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a thing for Chicago fans to have some hope that you can find a way out of complete mess and into relevance. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, we don't have to belabor this point. LAFC, you mentioned their fixture congestion. I thought they were going to be awesome. I thought Giroud was going to come in and be this immediate, fantastic impact. We haven't really seen that, but hey, they might win a trophy this week as they take on Sporting Kansas City in the U.S. Open Cup final. Speaking of somewhere with a lot of Chicago ties, the Colorado Rapids, maybe the feel-good story of the season in Major League Soccer. Chris Armas has worked some wonders there. Georgi Mihailovic has been great. Rafael Navarro is suddenly an elite MLS number 9. Do you think the Rapids are building something sustainable here rather than this just being kind of a bunch of things going right at once in what's been a magical season for them?
I think they are building towards something more sustainable. I don't think they are building towards something sustainable towards the level of where they've been this season, where they've been, basically in that top 4 spots for a long, long time now. I don't think their spending levels and their general lack of ambition really point to them being a team that is going to realistically continue to be right up towards the top of the Western Conference. But, that's not necessarily the bar for this Rapids team, or at least it hasn't been. The bar is them being competitive in the Western Conference and being one of the better teams in the Western Conference. And that they absolutely have been this year. I was skeptical of their decision to hire Chris Armas after he didn't really have a ton of success in Toronto, really struggled there, goes across the Atlantic and does some assistant coaching work. Now back in Major League Soccer. And he's been fantastic. I think he's done a really good job of raising the floor of this team, giving them a clear identity, a clear structure, a good balance of possession and defensive compactness, communicating those things clearly, trying to get the most out of a roster that he knows is flawed. There's a lot to like about the Rapids. One of the reasons beyond just spending that I'm concerned about them is they've gotten penalties. They had another one over the weekend at just this crazy rate. I was writing a piece about them recently. I don't have the updated stats in front of me, but prior to this past weekend's games, they were converting a penalty in 3 of 10 games. So 3 out of 10 games that they would play, they would get a penalty. That's a huge influx on your total goal scoring. This is a low scoring sport. Getting 3 penalties every 10 games is absolutely massive. I imagine those numbers are even higher now after they get one over the weekend. I don't think that's sustainable. Some of that is intentional. The Rapids do a better job of putting the ball into the final third and into the box than all but a handful of teams in MLS. And I asked Chris Armas about the penalty angle, and he's like, yeah, people talk about this as not being sustainable. I'm one of them, and I still believe that. But his point was, hey, we get the ball into those areas. We force mistakes. We force the hand of the opposing defense. And I think there is truth to that. So there are things building here. They need another attacker. They need a winger. I think that would be the best move for them. I'm not sold on Navarro as like this elite number 9. I know his numbers are decent this year, but a lot of those numbers are penalties. So they also have the whole Moise Mbito problem in that they sold him, and he looks like one of the best rising talents at his position in the entire world. He's incredible. They're not going to find another Moise Mbito, right? They're not even going to pay $7 million to get another Moise Mbito. So there are concerns that I have about this Rapids team, but man, I was too low on them coming into the year, and I'm not afraid to admit that.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar with Moise Mbito, he's a Canadian center back who's recently, 2-3 years ago, was playing junior college in Iowa. Yeah. And now if he keeps up his current form, he's playing for Nice now in France, and he won't be there for long on his current trajectory. I hope the Rapids got a very good sell on. And I can remember last offseason, Joe, when Fire fans saw Colorado hire Chris Armas, and a lot of people were like, whew, at least we didn't do that. And
totally.
That exactly hasn't gone great. Something that has not only not gone great, but been just total car crash. We have to touch on it. The San Jose earthquakes. I believe it was Jeremy Abobasi who over the weekend says everything's a total mess, and that's pretty good. I think the question that has to be asked is, like, this feels like they might be the biggest mess in the league history. Like, I guess the only recent comparison is those early MLS FC Cincinnati teams that were just awful. That was a problem that was fixed because the owner realized he shouldn't be running soccer ops. The San Jose Earthquakes, markedly not an organization who feels like they've got an owner who's going to learn any lessons about anything or how fans feel about his team. What do you even make of this? Like, I don't even know what to think of how bad they are. And I got to think maybe Quakes fans are wondering if their soccer team is following the baseball team east here in short order.
It's brutal. Abobasi used the word disaster, which is even stronger than mess. It's bad. And he's a smart dude. He knows it's bad. Everybody can see how dysfunctional the Quakes are. I don't think they're like all-time MLS peak dysfunction in thinking about Cincinnati and Chivas and maybe a few others here and there, even like the Galaxy and the Fire, like big clubs that should be big clubs and have been in the past, underperforming expectations for years after years after years. The Quakes don't have that level of expectation because they never showed that level of ambition and not really had that sort of sustained success. But yeah, in their own special way, they're involved in this conversation just for the sheer length of their incompetence. They don't have a lot of spending that comes from ownership. It's not ideal. You can work around that. We've seen teams do it before. The Union come to mind. But it's not great. That doesn't give their front office a whole lot of great cards to play. Chris Leach has done a very poor job as the top dog in their front office since he was given that title. Hasn't gone out and signed a bunch of great players. Hernan Lopez doesn't look like a player that was worth spending their club record fee. I think it was reported at $6 million back in March or April of this year. He's not been good. Bobacy's numbers have fallen off an absolute cliff. And again, he knows it. He's got 5 goals, I think, this season, 10 last year, 17 the year before that. It's a sharp decline. Like, this team is a complete mess. And you go and look at Tom Bogert of Give Me Sport reported some of the managers that they're looking to interview and have already interviewed. Bruce Arena's on that list. Robin Fraser's on that list. Gio Savarese is on that list. There's one other that I'm forgetting. There's no common thread. Oh, Berhalter. He was the other one on the list, which I don't think is going to happen. Like, there's no thread. Like, what is the stylistic through line between those people? Like, they don't understand, it seems to me as an outsider. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but it seems like the evidence all points to them not knowing how they want to run their team. And when you don't have money to spend, you have to know how you want to run your team, because that allows you to go out there and try to outperform your budget by finding players that can do specific things well. And when you marry this player who does XYZ really well with this player who does ABC really well, all of a sudden, you're not winning the wooden spoon. And that's exactly where the Quakes are right now.
Yeah, that is a list of managers who have gotten fired by MLS teams somewhat recently is kind of all I'm seeing there. Before we get out of here, Joe, I really do appreciate you taking the time. Do have to ask one U.S. men's national team related question, especially when we're talking about managers. Mauricio Pochettino, his first U.S. men's national team roster is expected in the next week or so for games in the October international window that comes up in a couple of weeks. What do you want to see? What are you expecting to see, I guess, is kind of the combo question I have here. You know, do you think we're going to see a list of 26 guys who looks a lot like a list of Gregg Berhalter 26 guys? Or what are you hoping we get out of this first batch of official Pochettino picks in the coming days?
My expectation in terms of the roster is basically that we're going to see a lot of players we know, because that's the pool, man. Like, those are the guys. So I think, and I hope to see a couple of different faces, maybe just for the sake of some change. Luca Coglioscio is still a name that I'm very, very curious about. Multinational, really. Canada, Italy, maybe one more country in there that he's eligible for. And he's also eligible for the U.S. So maybe he's a name that we see brought in. But I think the most interesting changes are less to do with the personnel, although there is intrigue there, and more to do with the tactical stuff. I'm not expecting a ton of super macro changes. In general, under Berhalter, the U.S. tried to keep the ball. And I think in general, under Pochettino, they're going to try to keep the ball. I would be curious to see more intensity in the press from a Pochettino team. He emphasized running and the importance of that, both on and off the ball, during his introductory press conference in New York City. I think that's going to be a focus. I also just want to see the U.S. get better at keeping the ball. If Pochettino is the guy you hired him to be, which is one of the best club coaches in the world and one of the biggest names in this sport, which he is, like, he should help elevate a, let's face it, fairly mediocre group of players into something more than that. So I really want to see the U.S. keep the ball. They will have it against Panama and Austin. I'd imagine they're going to have a fair amount of the ball in Mexico as well in that away game. I think it's in Guadalajara. I want to see the U.S. create real chances. I want to see them target zone 14, that area just on top of the middle of the box. And I want to see them really try to put pressure on opposing defenses with sharp, thoughtful, like, well put together possession play. We didn't see enough of that under Gregg Berhalter. Some of that's a player thing because the talent's just not quite there. Some of that is on the coaching staff as well. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be watching for.
That Mexico game is especially interesting for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
We know the U.S. players get up for that. Mexico, I can't remember the last time Mexico played a friendly, not in the United States, that they called a home game, let alone one against the U.S. So this is going to be an experience, especially with World Cup qualifying basically not existing anymore, not only for 26, but for all intents and purposes ever again for a team at the U.S.'s level. This is going to be a really cool game, and I hope it's the start of more of these sorts of things. Joe, thanks so much for your time. Again, you can check out Joe's work at Backheeled. He's got a staff of people doing great stuff over there across American soccer. And as I said, Total Soccer Show more often than not. Joe, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Of course. This was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Joe. Have a good one. And before we get out of here, we do have to give some flowers to a different Joe here. Joey Spathis behind the scenes here. This is his second to last day at CHGO. So a big, big shout out to Joe, and best of luck where he's going next. He's going to be very, very missed in these offices.
Appreciate that, Alex. It was only right to go out with a major audio issue on one of the last fire show I'll be doing, but we're going to clean up for the Red Star show after this. They're the best team in Chicago, but thank you. It's been a pleasure, and, I'll be around, but this has been great. Appreciate that. Means a lot.
Yep, shout out to Joe. As he mentioned, if you're watching live on YouTube, we do have the Red Stars next. That's in about 15 minutes. I'll be joined by Leslie Ryder of Gal Pal Sports to talk about, as Joey said, the current best team in Chicago sports. They're the only Chicago sports team that is currently in a playoff position, looking to end what would be just a hilarious long drought that I don't want to do the math on right now of how long it's been since the Chicago team was actually in the playoffs. So join us for that, or if you're listening on podcast, go check out CHGO Red Stars wherever you are listening to this show. That is going to do it for this episode of CHGO Fire. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Alex Campbell, and I'll see you next time.